Welcome to the Prosperity Podcast for entrepreneurs who are ready to drop the hustle and earn more. I'm your host, Danielle Amos, business and success coach, certified Proctor Gallagher Institute consultant, and lifestyle entrepreneur. Each week, I'll bring you amazing entrepreneurs who have built wealth, harnessing the power of their mind. Prosperity and money are truly about energy, and I'm on a mission to help you create financial abundance through the power of thought. It's time we started normalizing conversations about money and create the wealth that is yours. Are you ready? Let's do this. Welcome to episode 166 of the Prosperity Practice, the podcast that has you living your most abundant life. My name is Danielle Amos, and I am your host. Thank you for being here. Today, I have a very special episode for you. I have my mentor, Bob Proctor's son, Brian Proctor, on with us today. Brian is not only Bob's son, he also is the author of the book, the newly released, top-selling book, My Father Knew the Secret, Growing Up with Bob Proctor. This book was just recently launched and is already making a huge impact. I know in our community, we're seeing people read it, share their ahas, and just it's written in such a way that you'll find yourself emotional just by reading it. For those of you that have studied Bob Proctor's programs in the past, or even mine, you will probably be familiar with some of the stories that Brian shares. Just maybe you'll have a slightly different lens, because Brian shares from his perspective of growing up, having Bob Proctor be his father, and the fact that Bob knew the secret. Brian Proctor was born in 1961 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, the same year that Bob Proctor was given the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And Bob had over 60 years on his journey in personal development. So for close to 30 years, Brian worked alongside Bob as Bob taught on some of the most amazing stages around the world. I personally met Brian at a Proctor Gallagher Institute seminar as a consultant. And from the first time I met Brian, it was really, really clear that he understood this material. And like we share in the interview here in just a moment, you'll hear why he's so successful in his own life, why he's living such a blessed life. And he says, my father didn't give it to me, he taught it to me. So today, Brian lives with his wife, Corey, and who's a beautiful soul, and who I also met through being a consultant with Bob Proctor. Brian and Corey are self-employed, and they live in Washington State. And I know they built their dream home, or renovated their dream home, and are now living his dream life. And he spends it near the water and enjoying nature. So I am so grateful to have Mr. Brian Proctor on our podcast today. And I encourage you to listen as if you were in the room with us having this conversation, and you're listening to Brian's stories and what he learned from his father. Listen in a way that will have you apply them to your own life. Listen in a way that can create a shift for you right now, right here, today. And do your best to do that. Enjoy the interview. Today, we are in for a massive treat. We have Mr. Brian Proctor here. This is Bob Proctor's son and the author of the book, My Father Knew the Secret. Welcome to the Prosperity Practice, Brian. I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks, Danielle. It is great to be here, and it's really good to see you.
Thank you. I picked up this book as soon as I got the message that it was available, and right away I read it and I finished it. I told Corey, your wife, I could not put it down. I read it over the weekend. I actually stayed up quite late, and Paul's like, my husband's like, what are you up to? Like, what? I just couldn't put it down. And it's like, I'm getting quite emotional about it because, Brian, your willingness to share the lessons from your father and to share the moments of his life, especially near the end, in such a way is so powerful. And being someone that was lucky enough and privileged to be in your dad's inner circle and spend years through the Proctor Gallagher Institute, spending time with it, not as much time as what I would have loved and what you had, but just like hearing many of these stories over and over, and then having you put them in writing was incredible for me. It just, like, my heart filled with so much love for Bob, for you, for your family and PGI. And I got present to how lucky and how grateful I am for your dad's work. So, like, all that it took for you to put this and the years that it took for you to write this book, it honestly has been some of the best. It's been one of the biggest gifts for me. And so we'll have them edit that out just a moment. Go, Sky. Go, Sky. And that is my dog agreeing with us.
You want to know something? That would be my father speaking right there through the dog.
Guess what? Sky's a Pomeranian.
There you go. That says it all. I don't know if you remember, but Dad had the dog in his studio quite a bit, and every once in a while the dog would chirp in while he was doing something.
Like, at a really important point. Like, like, this is really important. Listen up, everyone. So perhaps we leave that in. Actually, let's leave that in. And
I say you do. Yeah.
Thank Bob for being here with us. I'm so grateful, Brian, for what it took for you to write this book and the time. And thank you for being here on the Prosperity Practice today.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And, just hearing your emotion, you were about to get me going too. So it's, writing this book, Danielle, was probably one of the best things I could have done for myself, for sure. And the response, people like yourself and others out there, the response that I've gotten back from people that have read it has just been heartwarming. It's just, I can't even put it into words. It's been so amazing. And it's been fun for me. I don't feel like I'm ever teaching here, and the book, I don't feel like I'm teaching, which really makes it easy for me. I just feel I'm sharing the stuff that my father taught me, and I'm sharing stories of my father, which is easy. So it's been a fun process, and it's been a good healing process, I think, as well.
Yeah. In the beginning of the book, you actually wrote that you believe that Bob didn't, like, he loved the conversations about the book with you so much that he didn't want those to end. And he probably knew that he wouldn't be here when it was actually launched.
Yeah. That was probably one of the toughest things for me, was to launch this book with him not here. I would have loved for him to see everything that's been happening. Corey, my wife, and I, we talk all the time about how much Dad would have loved this comment or that comment, and how it's being received, and how it's literally gone around the world, and what people are doing with it. It's been amazing. He would have loved that. And like I shared in the book, it was a great opportunity. I mean, Dad and I were very close, and we always talked a lot. But having the opportunity to share what I was writing with him was just incredible. He loved what I was doing. I was probably only halfway through it when he passed away. But, we got to share a lot of great conversations around it. He got to really give me some good insight into some of the things that happened in our past, which really helped. And it was a lot of fun. I didn't even have the name of the book. I didn't have the title, which was really tough. I had several different names that I was thinking of. None of them felt right. And even Dad, I could tell they didn't feel right to him too. But he didn't say anything. He was always supportive of whatever. And the title for this book came after he passed away. I was in bed. I was sleeping. It was probably 3 a.m. And I had a vivid dream of my father, which is really amazing. And then I woke up at 3 a.m. and this title, My Father Knew the Secret, was just in my head. It was clear as anything. And I thought, God, I got to write this down. And I did. And it was just like a no-brainer to me. I thought how perfect this was. Dad was always big in the self-development field. But when he got in that movie, The Secret, that catapulted his career to another level. And that's what got him on things like Larry King Live and Ellen DeGeneres and all of these different shows. He was 72 years old when that happened. So, I think about all the work he did before that. But when that happened, it catapulted his being everywhere. I mean, more people got to understand who Bob Proctor was after that time. And it was a great thing. So I thought tying that in with that event, and I really felt my father did know the secret. And I really feel that he taught it to me in many lessons. And, I've already had a few people ask, what is the secret? Can you share it with me? And here's my answer for that, Danielle. I always think the secret is different for me than it will be for you. And what the secret is for me when I read it will be something maybe not even close to what it is for you when you read whatever yours is in that book. But I do know that some of those lessons in the book are going to resonate with everybody that reads it. And when you do and you see it and you'll think, wow, this will change my life. There's the secret. And, I think there's just so many good nuggets in here that, feel good about it.
I remember Bob being asked what the secret was in Think and Grow Rich. And he would answer in a vague way, encouraging us to find what resonates or what is for us in the moment. And as you were sharing, it came to me like perhaps the secret changes.
I think it does. I mean, you're a great example, and me as well. We have been to so many events and so many seminars. And we've heard my father say the same thing over and over. But speaking just on my behalf, every time I listened to it, it was like it's the same thing coming, but I was at a different stage in my life. So I always saw it from a different perspective. And even though he was teaching the same thing, I was learning something new. And you can read a book and, you'll read it and you'll get something out of it. You'll read it the next time and you'll see something that you didn't even see in it the first time. And it's just as our awareness grows, we see more and we're open to more.
And literally in the program that your father created, Thinking into Results, that I coach, I actually have checked this because in my mind, the participant's guide changed. I'm like, that wasn't there. And I go back and I have a couple copies because I was a client and then became a consultant and coach, and they're the same. And I'm like, I honestly had never seen that line before. It wasn't even highlighted in the book. Like my mind just skipped over it, but it was always there. And I think now I know I wasn't in harmony with that section, or I wasn't ready for it. It wasn't for me at the time. It's not a problem. And as my awareness grows, the different parts in that book stand out as well. And that's what I found here. So I went back in prep for our interview today and went back and was reading the book last night. And I have probably twice as many notes in here and like pages turned over from that, a few months ago. I think when I first got it, like at least 6 weeks ago, the pieces resonated with me. There were different chapters that resonated with me then that different ones resonate now. And that's where I was thinking, like, perhaps like it's all of this living a certain way, thinking a certain way is the secret. The different aspects of what that certain way, I believe, change depending on what we're going through in our life and the point.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is, I wrote the book from a perspective that my father loved. And I talk about it in the introduction of the book, is that you can pick it up anywhere and start reading. If you're going through a tough time in something, or you need an answer in something, you can just open it anywhere and start reading. The book is not meant to be read from front to back, although that's, the first time around you probably do. But from that point on, you can just open it anywhere and just start to read. And if you've got something that you need an answer for, you'll probably open it to that right spot and you'll see the answer. And it's easy for me to say that because this book is not about me. This book is all about my father and what I learned from him, and the stories and things growing up with him, and what he taught me to get me to the point where I'm living, I consider a charmed life. And I really feel I am. And that's because of everything I learned from my father. He never gave me anything, but he taught me everything I needed to know so that I could live the best version of myself and live my best life. And, it happens. It happens when you study.
I love that. I, out of all the lessons that your father taught, do you have one that stands out as a favorite or the most impactful?
So I've got a couple. The first one, if you want me to tell the story a little bit, the first one is all around the impression of increase. And I won't get into this one particular piece of it, but he lived it right up until the day of his death. He really did. And that first chapter that you talk about, that for me was the hardest chapter to write. But it showed, when you read it, anybody that's watching this, if you get the book and you read that first chapter, you'll understand it. It shows who my father was at his worst time, when he was not well. He still treated everybody around him so incredibly well. And I learned the impression of increase when I was 9 years old. We had just moved to Chicago. I was born in Toronto, grew up pretty much most of the time in Toronto, but lived in Toronto. We moved to England, then we moved back to Toronto, and then to Chicago. So by grade 4, I'm already in my fourth different school. And I'm 9 years old. I hated being that new kid in school. I was always the new kid in school. And I can remember sitting in the house on Maplewood Lane in Glenview, Illinois. Dad talks about that house all the time. I remember sitting in the den with him there and talking about being leery about going to school again. I'm that new kid. And Dad gave me a piece of advice that I've used for the rest of my life. He said to me, he says, Brian, put these 4 letters across the forehead of anybody that you're talking to, MMFI. And that stands for make me feel important. He says, if you can make the person that's standing in front of you feel important, he says, you'll make friends really easily and you'll get on in the world well, and you will see that you're not the new kid in school for very long. And I never really thought about it. I just did it from that point on. I thought that was good advice. Well, years and years later, when I was in real estate, this was in the late 80s, I think it was 1988, 1989. I was at a seminar in California. A fellow by the name of Mike Ferry was putting on this seminar. There was about 2,000 real estate agents in the room. And I was sitting right in the front row. I was within 1 year new in the business, and I was already in the top 100 internationally for this real estate firm in sales in my first year. And so this fella, he called me up on the stage. And he asked me, Brian, what are you doing that's causing you to be so successful right out of the gate? Like, people here need to know. And when I stood there and I thought about it, it took me back to that time when I was 9 years old. And I thought, that's the secret for me at that moment, was making people feel better when they're in your presence. So the whole thing around the impression of increase is to leave everyone you come in contact with feeling better about themselves because they came into contact with you that day. That's it. And it's easily done if we pay attention to it. We pay a person a simple compliment, a genuine compliment. We talk to them and we ask them questions, and we're interested in their answers, and we're present and we're listening to them. If we can do that, we are going to get on in the world, because all anybody wants is to feel seen and heard. And if you can see and hear who is in front of you and actually be engaged and listen to them and not worry about what you're going to say next, or can you up whatever it is that they're telling you, rather than get into that game, really just take a sincere interest of the person you're in front of, and you will get along great in this world. And I remember for me, real estate, I got referrals like crazy because everybody wanted to deal with me. They just liked me. And that's what Dad had said. He says, people will just like you if you're interested in them. And that was a great lesson for me. And it's something I have always tried to practice. I see it in my kids now. My kids do it. I just think it's a wonderful way of being. It's a really wonderful way of being.
Feels so good to be around on this end. So when I first met you, Brian, that was something that I really noticed, that, we'd be at a really busy conference and so many people around wanting to get your attention, and you really stop and you looked me in the eye and had a conversation. It's like all of this craziness can be around, like going around. You have a ton of responsibility, and yet you're taking a moment to speak with me. And it was something I noticed right away about you.
Yeah, and thank you for noticing that. That's something I've just always practiced. And I'll tell you, when that is the biggest challenge, when you're at a big event and you got people all around. And for me, all I did was it was like being a camera, and I would just focus on who I was talking to. No matter what was going on around me, I didn't let it affect me. I just created a blur in my mind around it. Because if you're at a big event and you're scattered, you're looking at this person and that person, everything, you're not present. Dad always said, you have to be present if you want to be effective. Be present in the moment. And you're present in the moment when you're engaged with whoever you're speaking to in the moment. You're not worried about what's next, what's going on next hour. I got to get over and do this. You're just present in the moment. And if you can keep doing that, your life is going to be good. Things will happen for you in a good way.
I'm reminded of, in order to do that, we need a strong will muscle as well, the ability to focus on one thing. And funny enough, at an event similar to when I met you very early on in the Matrix, I helped Bob as a coach. And it was one of the first times meeting your dad. And he called me out on the opposite of being focused. He actually, I was standing in front of him and I asked him a question, and perhaps I was doing the opposite of what you said. I'm not sure, maybe looking around, worried about who else was around, listening, if I was saying it the right way, I'm not sure. Either way, he intuitively picked up and he said to me, if you had a job, you'd be fired. And it was just like, and I'm like, okay. And he said, you need to strengthen your will muscle. Mm-hmm. Your ability to focus is lacking. And he gave me the exercise to look at the dot, and I went and I took that coaching. And he said, when your energy's like out there, and he put up his hand, he's like, it's just diluted. And it was a really, really important lesson for me. So I think about the way that you explain leaving someone with an impression of increase, and what I felt from you to really be focused, and how I was the complete opposite. And I got a similar lesson, but through a different way, through the will.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, here's the cool thing with the impression of increase. When you can leave somebody feeling better because they were in your presence, you will potentially change their day, but even more so, you could potentially change their life. And that's the cool thing. Like, I look at someone like yourself, Danielle, and what you're doing out there, and clients, and how you work with your clients. You're not only changing their day because you're present and you're helping them, you're changing the course of their life. And that is a powerful thing. And it's a heart-centered, heartfelt thing that we can carry because you're present. That's it. It's such a easy thing to do, but we don't think about it.
Yeah. And this one conversation, and for those listening, like this conversation between Brian and I, as you're listening, has the ability to change your life. Like, really be present with us as if you're right here with us. I'd encourage you to do that. And I do believe that a conversation can change a person's life, like that one conversation. And I know I had many, and have had many with Bob, that definitely changed the course, and it kept getting better and better and better. And of course I needed to be open to receive, that goodness. I notice with my daughter, she's very good at leaving others with an impression of increase. You said that your kids also do the same thing. I wonder about programming. So, and paradigm, and your thoughts on this. And as Bob's son, like, we all have a paradigm. And so, and you, Bob Proctor's son, grew up with a paradigm. Like, if you think about this, because when I first heard about paradigm, and like how we're programmed and between the ages of 0 and 7, my first thought was like, oh my goodness, like how have I programmed my daughter? Like what have I been saying to her about money and lack, and like, really creating a paradigm that I didn't want her to have. And I often say, like, to my clients, like, there's no one, our parents did the best they could, and there's no one that grows up without a paradigm. And so here you are, and as a young person going through your life, and I read quite a bit in the book about the different lessons that you learned along the way. How much did Bob hold space for you to just like be you? You grew up with a paradigm that him and other people programmed you with, and it was what it was. And then you got the tools to change your paradigm to now be living your best life. But it's not like necessarily that we can program our kids ever to have this perfect paradigm so that they grow up having the perfect life. I don't know. Do you hear what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I think, really all a paradigm is our thoughts, feelings, actions towards things, the way we see things, the way we view things, how we react to things. We all have paradigms, good and bad. And so, Dad was always of the opinion that if we have a good paradigm, keep enhancing that. If we have a bad one, let's work at changing it. For me, growing up with Bob Proctor as a father, I realized I was lucky. And we often joked, Dad always said that we pick our parents when we come into this world. And I always laugh and think, well, I did pretty good, but I think what I got the most with my father was that he was always supportive. And I think if anybody listening to this, if you have kids, you have, just friends, relatives, whatever, always be supportive. That was the cool thing with Dad. He was always supportive. Even if he didn't agree with something I was doing, or he didn't like something I was doing, he was always supportive. And, as a young kid, my teens or whatever, I made the odd blunder, stupid mistake. Dad never berated me for anything that was wrong. He was always supportive, always just behind me. And he never drove home that, why would you do that? Or, he was always just good. And he would always have me look for the good out of a situation. And that was another unique thing with him. I wrote a chapter in the book called Living with, Rose-Colored Glasses. And that's really because of my father. And I feel I do live that way. I look at the positive in everything. It's not to say that we don't have negative happen in our life. And it's not to say that we don't have negative paradigms. We all have them to one degree or another. But it is up to us to take control of the way we react and respond to things, the way we look at things. And we can look at things as, oh boy, this is terrible. Or we can look for the opposite of it and say, what's good going to come out of this? And that's just the way I've always lived. I did learn that from Dad, which is a paradigm, and it's a good one, I think. But I think it all comes down to our awareness. And the more we become aware of how we're living and why we're thinking in certain ways, the more we can change it if we feel it needs to be changed. And if we have something holding us back, let's recognize what that is and then get on to the work of what can we do to change that so that we can live a better life. And that's it. I'm the first to say that, yes, I was lucky. And I realized not everybody had great parents like I did. And some people have, honestly, I know some people have miserable parents, and parents have maybe done bad things to them. But here's something that Dad always taught. And I love this quote when he said it in a seminar. It always just resonated with me. He says, we cannot change the time we got out of bed this morning. I loved it when he said that, because it's whatever time we got out of bed this morning, that's when we got out of bed. What's happened to us in the past has happened to us in the past, good or bad. The key is, what can we do in the present moment to be the best version of ourselves? And if we start living that way, boy, Danielle, we're all off to the races. It's not to forget what's happened in the past, but don't let it control us. Don't let it dictate who we are now. And that was just something great I've always learned from Dad. He says the best way to be the best version of you is to be that best version in the present moment, right now, because we can't change what's happened in the past. And if we worry about the future or look at the future with anxiety, that's not doing us any good either. But no matter where we're at, good or bad, if we do the best we can right now, I know it will get people out of depression. It will cause people to be more effective. A lot of good will happen in our life if we're in the present moment and doing the best we can right here, right now.
I actually used that this morning with my clients, that part of your book where he said you can't change what time you get out of bed in the morning, or this morning. Right now, our community's in a 90-day challenge to complete success habits in their studies every day. And we've got like a leaderboard, and we're celebrating people. And if they miss a day, they have to start over. And so we're holding them accountable, and we're celebrating, but also recognizing, so we're on day 3, and recognizing that some people have already started over. And what we notice in the community is that there's a tendency to be really hard on yourself. Like, I missed the affirmations last night, and so now I've got to start over. But to the point, like, we can't change what time we got out of bed this morning, or if you did your studies, all you can control is right now, and the choices that you're making right now. And it doesn't help us to go down the path of judgment. And I've also really learned that from your dad, as well as in your book, because you share the story of when you crashed his car and his response.
Yeah. That was just such a great lesson for me. I was 17, 18 years old. I'm not, and I think it was in my last year of high school, and I was going to an exam. Dad was out of town. Whenever he was out of town, he left me his car. And he had at that time this 1976 Cadillac Eldorado convertible. Man, that car I just loved that car. I learned to drive in that car. I got my license in it, everything. And whenever Dad went out of town, he would always let me use his car. And that was a really cool car at that time, back in the late 70s. And I'll never forget this. Dad always said, a car is just a piece of tin. The car will either own you or you will own it. And I share it in the book. I talk about some people that have a really nice car that don't let anybody else drive it. They don't share it. They just, it's their prized possession. Dad never felt that was a good way to be. That was letting the car own you. And he always said that to me, but I never took it to heart until I crashed it. And I was going to this exam. I wasn't paying attention. I was driving fast because I was running late, and I ran right into the back of somebody that was stopped at a stoplight because I was looking it doesn't matter. I was looking in a parking lot for a parking spot, and I wasn't paying attention to what was in front of me. And I hit this lady from the rear, and I can still remember that moment. I got out of the car. I was in a panic. I thought, oh my God, did I hurt this lady? I did some pretty good damage to both the cars. And this lady got out of her car. She was like my mother's age. And I thought, I'm going to get in some trouble now. And I thought she's going to be all upset with me. Well, she runs to me and she's crying and she hugs me. And she asked if I was okay. It was the most incredible response. That for start, I'll never forget. And she said she was okay. So it was all good. She was just crying because she was shocked at, everything that happened. Well, then, once that was all settled and done, I was worried then I got to tell Dad I wrecked his car. And this car was a prized possession for him. He loved that car. And so this is a great example of creating nonsense in our head. So I'm creating all this nonsense in my head that Dad's going to be upset with me. And, what did I do? I'll never get the car again. And when I finally talked to him that evening, it was the complete opposite of that. He didn't ask anything about the accident. All he asked was, am I okay? Was the other lady okay? And then he said to me these words. He says, Brian, it doesn't matter what happened to the car. As long as you're okay and that other lady's okay, the car can be fixed. It's just a piece of tin. That was his response. And it was just such a great response. I remember the emotion I felt, the relief I felt. And then when he got it fixed and he left town again, he gave me the car again. And he didn't give me a lecture around it. He knew I was already hard enough on myself. And the one thing he said to me, he says, Brian, it's called an accident for a reason. It's an accident. It's not like you intentionally went out to do that. It was an accident. We learn from these things. And that was it. That was his response. So it was a pretty amazing thing. The funny thing was, I remember telling this story, Danielle, to a group of consultants quite a few years ago, because I thought it's a great example of how my father lived. He actually practiced what he preached. So I was telling that story, and I was it was in Florida, Palm Beach area. We were doing this event. And I told this story. Well, that very evening, I get a call from my son. And my son I had a truck at the time, and my son smashed it up. He was driving too fast on a rainy night, went off the road, hit a telephone pole. And I can remember, especially since I just told the story, my response to Danny was virtually word for word for what my father said to me. And I know that I put Danny at ease right away because of my response. I wasn't upset at him either. I just, was he okay? And it's a great way to live. It's just it was a fun story. It's fun to relive that story.
Well, when I read that, that's one of the stories that I have marked for myself and actually journaled. I put your book down at that point and I journaled because it was very in my space that I have reacted to Eloise in a way that I was the opposite of that. And that now, like once I become aware of it, then I have a different choice that I can make. So I actually journaled about like if those things or when those things come, and, there's a disappointment in something that she does where I'm disappointed, I don't need to show her that. And what would that actually look like? And I got present to how your father did that for you so many times, Brian. Like, it really feels like that's a huge lesson that he was able to pass on, where he just I don't know if I want to say hold space for you to be you, and that he didn't judge. He allowed you to make the decision. Even the title of this book,
right?
He didn't press his opinions on you from the sounds of it.
Yeah, he never did. And that's kind of a unique quality, I think. I think we do try to force things on our kids and stuff. And I've done my best to not do that on my children. I'll give you a great example. There's things that can happen that drive you crazy, especially if you have children. I think you can relate. And the overriding paradigm, I guess you could say, that has been created within me was that my father was always supportive, no matter what. And that's a great quality. So I've tried to live up to a lot of those qualities myself as a parent. My son, Danny, I think you've met Danny. When he was younger, he wanted to be a magician. And he was working with a deck of cards all the time. He was I don't even think he was driving yet. He was probably 13, 14 years old. Well, he was forever shuffling cards. He had to get really dexterous with his fingers and his hands and how to work things. And he was forever shuffling cards. And as a parent, I can tell you, it started to drive me crazy. We'd be in a car driving somewhere and all I'd hear is, just the cards shuffling. He'd be sitting on the couch, we're watching TV, shuffling the cards. How often as a parent would we say, stop that? I never did that with Danny. I always let him. It was driving me crazy inside, but I never let Danny know it was driving me nuts. I always supported him. I never shut him down when he was doing something that he was passionate about. And as much as it drove me crazy, he never knew it, because I knew it was important for him to follow his passion and to do whatever it was. He had a passion about something. So what I did was I held him up and I would ask him to do tricks for me and do different things. And I just, I did what my father did for me. I just supported him. I always stood behind him, even if it was something that personally I would never want or to do. But I think that's how we're all individuals. We're all different. We're never all going to be the same. If we were, it'd be a pretty boring world. But if you can just encourage and support rather than criticize and shut down, it's a good thing.
Yeah, such a beautiful thing. Wow, what a gift.
Yeah.
And I think, it's not, I got present to like, it's not about me being perfect. It's just my willingness to grow. And when I become aware that ways for me to be better and to step into that as a parent, that there's an opportunity. That for me was an important piece when I got into this work in thinking the results, was like, I was really hard on the way I had been operating for so long. And that was also a paradigm because it was my habitual way. So that kept putting myself down.
Right.
And part of my self-image was deciding now it's like, I can't change the way that or what time I woke up this morning, and I can change how I operate now.
The cool thing, Danielle, is like you say, with any of this stuff, is that now we're aware of it.
Yeah.
And when you're aware, you can act differently. And it's like you said, you can't change what's happened before. If we go off the rails on something and we've done it, or we've done things that we're ashamed of, or we've done things to our kids that, God, I wished I didn't respond that or react that way. We can't change any of that. But when things happen to us again in the future, now we have that awareness that when that happens, just step back for a second and think, okay, what is the better way to respond here? And just start living in the now. If we can start doing that, we'll respond to things in a much better way.
Yeah, totally. We created something in our family called the do-over.
Oh, I like that.
So this is, if in real time, we're doing our best to respond rather than react, and like catching ourselves and just taking a moment, like you said, and stepping back. And is this the way that I want to react to this? Or is there a way that I'd like to respond? And if we found and we also created a secret word. So our word is lollipop. My daughter created it from when she was really and she can say lollipop to us if she notices something, because our kids can really keep us accountable to responding in a way that we want to respond. And so she would use that word, but also it really helped her to see that we were willing to recognize those times that we did react, and that there was a different way that we would prefer to respond. So we would actually, if something happened a few hours ago, we would talk about it. And when we became aware that we would react, we wish we responded a different way. But if it just happened, we got in this habit of going back and asking, like, hey, can you ask that question again? Like, it might be my daughter is like, can I go to my friends, or can I, like, whatever it is. And if we were doing something else and my husband and I found that we were reacting, she could ask us again, and then we respond from the way that we wanted to respond. And we got to forget and forgive the rest, and like learn from it and move on. And it's been a really powerful exercise for us.
That's a great exercise.
Yeah, it doesn't happen as often as now, because I think we've really stepped into this power of being able to recognize the way that we're being in the moment. Mm-hmm. However, for a while it took something, and we would reflect maybe a few hours later and then stop and course correct in a way. Yeah. For me, the first time I read your book, your chapter on forgiveness was huge. That and the act as if really got me. Forgiveness, I think, and I know because of where I was in my life when I first picked up your book, that power and what you write about how Bob talks about forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for ourselves. Right. And I just want to bring it up so I can reference a little bit of it. You give a quote from your dad. It says, true forgiveness means that we choose to accept things as they are, extract the good and let go of the rest. And it allowed Bob to reclaim his inner peace following betrayal or hurt many times throughout his life, or throughout your life. And that you go on and say when there was something that would happen, he would guard his mind. He doesn't let them enter his mind. And if they do, he immediately replaces that thought with something else, or picks up one of his dogs to change his focus. I underline that part. Forgiveness is for you and not the other person. By taking responsibility for my peace of mind, I choose how to respond to it. And you go on and you give such great exercises that really allows a person to let go, change their perception about what's happening, and harvest the good. And I wanted to thank you for that exercise. For those exercises, because it really, I don't know that I'm fully there yet, just in my personal life and some things that I'm moving through. But your way that you explain forgiveness is in a way that I hadn't heard Bob explain it before. And you talk about how you had to forgive in your own life and past relationships. And I want to thank you for that. Really, you said that you were punishing yourself for letting a past relationship drag on the way that you had, and for staying in that place and to not honor you and your own principles. And just by reading that paragraph, Brian, I got present to how I was doing something similar, and just like not being true to myself and getting present to what it looks like to be true to myself. And
Right.
thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that resonated with you. I can remember where I was sitting when I wrote that chapter. I was still living in Florida at the time. I was sitting at my desk there, and I was actually having a conversation with Dad. And he was sharing with me all the things that I wrote. I took so many notes at that time. And, forgiveness is such a powerful thing. And it's not an easy thing. We have all had bad things happen to us. Some people a lot worse. And there's no degree of bad or worse or whatever. Everybody's had bad things happen to them. The big thing that Dad always taught was that if we harbor onto those bad things and we just hang on to them and we keep living that bad thing, we're creating a negative loop within our own head, and it's not doing us any good. And when we harbor bad feelings towards somebody that wronged us, we're not hurting them, we're hurting ourselves, because we're letting that loop play in our head. But if we can forgive them, let them go, release that energy, you're not forgetting what they've done. And he says, forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's not like just forget that ever happened. Like when he had somebody that treated him wrong in business, he forgave them, but he never forgot it, and he never did business with them again. But he let it out of his head, because when you harbor those negative thoughts, you really are only hurting yourself. So forgiveness is not to say, hey, that's okay. That's okay. You did that to me. That's not what it's about. It's about letting ourselves free of the bad that happened to us, and forgive them. They only did what they knew in their, whatever part of their world that they're living in. And unfortunately, we were the recipient of that. But by letting it go, we gain freedom ourselves, and we gain mental freedom. And when we can release that energy, it allows us to open up into life and to receive so much more, and sometimes, as I said in the book, it's not about just forgiving somebody else. It's about forgiving something that we've done. Because let's face it, we've done bad things in our life to other people, maybe not intentionally, but things happen. And if we harbor onto those thoughts, we're letting, again, that negative circle going on in our head about ourselves and berating ourselves, and that knocks our own self-image down. Well, we have to forgive that too. You have to let it go. It's like, you'll never change the time you got out of bed this morning. What's happened in the past just happened in the past. Let it go, because it's not doing you any good if it's a negative thing. Let it go and just be the best version of you right now. And when you can let that go, you can actually feel it. When you give energy and thought to forgiveness and letting that event out of your head and letting what it's doing to you out of your head, you'll feel it in your heart, and you'll feel it in your energy. Your whole being will be uplifted, because it's not doing us any good to keep ruminating on that thought. So let it go, and then start to live the best version of you. It's a great way to live.
Powerful. I found that for me, the habit of replaying the negative in my mind was so easy. Like it was such a habitual way of me living, that for me to let it go and focus and like just release and focus on the good. A practice that really helped me was to write. So I always remember your dad saying, like, writing causes thinking, and we can't think two thoughts at the same time. So if I write how I want to think of myself and think of the situation and harvest the good from it and gain the lesson, that if I can actually keep writing in that moment, then I can focus on what I want to focus and just release and let go of this negative stuff that doesn't serve me. That was a tool that helped me.
Right.
So
yeah, and that's a good way to do it, because when we first start giving thought to forgiving, let's just take an example: somebody that's hurt us, and it drives us crazy in our head. Well, we can't just put it out of our head just like that. It's going to take a little bit of time. And at first, when you start thinking of letting them go, letting that thing go, it's like, no, why would I? Because they did me wrong. And that's you've got that anger or whatever it is circling in your head. Well, you need to get rid of that, because that energy keeps you blocked. And like you say, if you can keep writing it out, what the outcome that you want, the forgiveness, keep writing it out. Eventually, you'll understand that, yeah, we just forgive them to their higher good and let it go. And it doesn't always happen overnight, but if we keep writing it out in affirmation, whatever that may be, it will happen. And it will happen sooner than you think. When it comes back to ourselves, one of the things I've always loved to say is that, would you be friends with somebody that talked to you the way you talk to yourself? And we want to give thought to, what are we saying to ourselves? Are we berating ourselves, or are we praising ourselves? And you want to give thought to that loop that's going on in our brain.
That's great. What are the other lessons before we wrap here, Brian, that I love that you shared? And I have a list, actually, because I was thinking about all the stories that you shared that I had heard Bob share with us, but then you gave a different perspective, and it was really powerful. I'm going to just list them off, and then I want to talk about one last. So I love how you called Joe Uncle Joe, and how Bob met him in jail when he was not when Bob was in jail, but when he was teaching. That was huge. Also, the story of when you bought your car. I don't know if you remember, but we actually got that lesson you shared with us when at Millionaire Roundtable, and you were talking about, I think your dad asked you to share with us about investing in what you want when you think it's maybe over the price that you want, and dad saying at that time, and it was in your book, compared to what? It's too expensive compared to what?
Right.
So I love that story. Also, how Bob, when you were a child, how your dad put his hand on your chest and told you about waking up. And I changed it slightly for my daughter. I would tell her that she can be, do, and have anything that she wanted. And I would talk that same kind of good to her and repeat the things that I knew that she wanted to her. So I love that lesson in hearing that. And then the last one is talking good behind other people's back. At seminars that we would come, and I had the pleasure of seeing you always would mention that, whether it was our inner circle dinners or in smaller conversations, I would hear you say, or overhear you say, you know what, Dad and I were talking about you, good behind your back. And I just it was something that really resonated. And I can remember you actually sharing with other people about you guys talking behind backs, but talking good. Anything to share on that, and how you and him would do that and what that meant?
Yeah, we got into the habit of doing that. We always talked early in the morning. It wouldn't be unusual to find the two of us on a phone call at 5 a.m. And I don't remember why I named it that, but I named it that after a while. And then Dad would say sometimes when we're talking, let's talk good about somebody behind their back, and it came down to this, so often there's conversations that go on that people get involved in nasty gossip and crazy stuff and talking bad about people. Well, they don't even know you're talking bad about them. So the only person you're hurting, again, is yourself, because of the negative crap you got swirling in your head about whatever you're talking about. And so we got in the habit of talking good about people behind their back for really, the main point was it creates a real positive energy within yourself. They don't even know you're saying anything about them, but boy, when you start doing that, start to imagine, well, don't even imagine, just start to take notice of how you feel when you're talking good about somebody behind their back. You feel better. The person you're talking to you're uplifting them because you're getting them to focus on something good. And another practice Dad always had me do is, if you're in a conversation with somebody and it goes down that gossip road, he says, try to switch that conversation. Try to talk good about that other person. Try to say something good, and see if you can change that conversation around. Because if you can, it's going to create a better energy around it all. So it was a fun thing that we did. Oftentimes I would email somebody or give them a call and say, hey, Dad and I were talking good about you behind your back, because, people like to hear that. One of the best compliments I ever had, I had a client who you would know that came to a lot of seminars. This is a couple of years ago, but she sent me a text and she says, my husband and I were talking good behind your back today. I thought, wow, that was so nice to read, but also to know that they were practicing that habit. And it's a simple concept, but there's a lot of power to it.
And I love when it's intentional like that. Like, let's take a moment to talk about someone and think about also not only the energy that moves through you, which I also think that same energy moves through you when you leave someone with an impression of increase, right? When they're in your presence as well. It's the same energy. But also like just you putting that out there into the universe, like that positive piece and what you put out comes back. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it always does. It always does. Any book you see, any book you read, that's based on self-development, it'll all tell you that. So it's important. We have to live that.
Well, thank you for your time today, Brian, and blessing our community with your presence and your knowledge and your stories and your energy. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Danielle. And I hope everybody goes out and gets a copy of the book. I just know that when you read it, I mean, I can see that's already marked up pretty well. I love that. I can say from my heart that I know there's going to be things that will touch you in that book. And I say that easily because, as I mentioned in the beginning, this book is not about me. It's really about my father and everything he taught. And what I love about it and the feedback we've been getting from it is that I believe it shows Bob Proctor as who he was as a family man, as a father, as a friend, a different view of who he was than what you just see on the stage. And I think it shows that he really lived what he taught from a unique perspective. Corey, my wife, she always said that, Brian, you're the only one that can tell this story. You're the one that was with him from the very start. And so it was fun for me. So, as I say, this book's not about me. It's really about Dad, and it's about some valuable lessons that I learned all of my life. Some that, like you say, that you've heard in seminars, and others that you haven't. So there's some nice insight in there. So I appreciate that the book resonated with you, that you got it, and I hope your community likes it as well.
And what's so cool about the stories, just to like expand on what Brian was saying, is I have heard a lot of them from Bob's perspective, but hearing them from you is slightly different. And then what you also did is you added pictures of places that we like, when we're hearing stories, it's normal to imagine what that house looked like, what the car looked like,
right.
And you actually filled in the gap there, which I thought was cool. And if you're listening to this and perhaps you haven't been in a Bob Proctor seminar before, although you can watch a lot of them on YouTube, or you can even hear it in the programs that Bob created, he often told the stories. So you'll find and if not, you're going to find them, hear them in a way that Brian gives them to us. But there's so much magic in them. There's a reason why Bob would share these stories. And now, Brian, you're sharing your perspective. Yep. And you've been able to fill in the gaps. Also, what I love, if you're like me and you write in your books and you mark them up and I have different color highlighters and pens, you've given us a section for each chapter for notes, but also a way to apply it,
Right.
which is huge. Most books, and it will make no difference. We read a book, but we don't apply it. And that's what most people do. They pick up a book and they read it and they put it back down again and they pick up a new book. You've given us tools on how to actually apply the lessons through questions, and for us to consider, like you actually call it that. What does it mean to stay open to possibilities? This is huge. You're showing us how to apply this, get the information from our conscious mind into the subconscious and apply it actually to our life so it makes a difference. And I want to thank you for that. Please, more books. Thank
you. It's funny. The consider points, that was actually my wife's idea. And I thought, wow, that just is so good, because what it does is it anchors the story and it gives us a way of how to apply it. And I think that's important. I think so many times that, we're learning good material, but then we don't go out and apply it. And I think this gives us a way to reflect on it and give thought to, okay, how can I apply this in my life right now? And when we start to apply these things in our lives right away, our life is going to change. It might not change today or tomorrow, but I promise if we start applying these things 6 months from now, oh my God, Danielle, we'll be completely different people. And that's what I love about this personal development space. It allows us to keep changing ourselves for the better. And if we actually apply what we're learning, we'll live a life way better than we can even imagine right now. And it'll just keep getting better.
I love that. That's actually a note that your dad once wrote in a book for me. Life keeps getting better. Keep going.
Right. Yeah. Better is a good word. He always said that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Corey, for adding the consider points, because often that's what I find myself trying to figure out, how do I apply this now? So that's a huge help. Thank you so much, Brian, for writing this book, for who you are as a leader. And I believe you're a great teacher. So in sharing your stories, you are teaching us so much. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah. And do you have any last words to share with the audience? We'll put a link where they can find the book. And when you use the link, and we'll put the steps, there's some bonuses that Brian has offered. When you use the affiliate link that Brian shared with me, you'll get some bonuses as well. So we'll put all of that in the show notes for you, as well as where to connect with Brian through his social media handles. So all of that's in the show notes. And I recommend that you go follow Brian on Instagram and the different platforms, and then send him a message. Let him know what you got out of the book. And perhaps if there's any questions as well, you can send them to him that way as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess as a final thought, a statement my dad always said, he says, a pro is at their best regardless. And he lived that way of life. Even when he wasn't feeling great, he taught the very best way that he could. And I think as a final point, I think if we can live our life by being the best version of ourselves in the here and now, right in the moment, we'll live a great life. We just don't give that thought often enough. So, be at your best regardless. Doesn't matter what's going on around you. Be the best version of you right now. If you can do that, you're gonna go places.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on, Danielle.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Just even as you shared that last piece, I'm again, flooded with so many ideas and stories that your dad shared. So just, this is such a gift for me personally. And it's my promise to continue to, be the best version of myself so that I can have an impact on others like yourself, and the way that your dad has and will continue to do through the legacy of his work. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining this conversation with myself and Mr. Brian Proctor, the author of My Father Knew the Secret, Growing Up with Bob Proctor. So if you haven't already, go to the show notes, grab my affiliate link, and get your own copy of the book. And in the show notes, we've given you information on how to get the bonuses that Brian has offered through my particular link. And share your ahas with me. I'd love to see a picture of you reading it. Share your ahas with Brian as well. We've given you his social media links, and really let him know how this book impacted. I know it will mean the world to him. So thank you to each and every one of you for listening. And if it resonates, give us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen to this podcast, and share the link with others. This is a really great conversation, so don't keep it to yourself. I love you. Thanks for being here. Expect abundance.